We are in the midst now of a sermon series on Peter in the Gospels. The reason for Peter in the Gospels for this series is because anytime we read about Peter, we're being told it's about us. Peter always represents us, especially in the Gospel of Mark. In fact, in the Gospel of Mark, Peter just never gets it right. Never gets it right, which can give us great hope and great strength, because try as we might, we usually find some way of doing something a little bit awry. Hence, the grace needed, even in the worship service. So, Peter, in the beginning of this reading today, it sounds like Peter's finally figuring something out. But if you listen, you'll find out that once again, he just didn't get it.
Verses 27 to 38. Jesus went on with his disciples to the village of Caesarea Philippi, and on the way he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" And they answered him, "John the Baptist, and others Elijah, and still others one of the prophets." He asked them, "But who do you say that I am?" Peter answered him, "You are the Messiah." And he sternly ordered them not to tell anyone about him. Then he began to teach them that the Son of Man must undergo great suffering and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the scribes, and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. He said all this quite openly, and Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But turning and looking at his disciples, he rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan, for you are setting your mind not on living things, but on human things." He called the crowd with his disciples and said to them, "If anyone wants to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will save it. For what will it profit them to gain the whole world and forfeit their life? Indeed, what can they give in return for their life? Those who are ashamed of me and of my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of them the Son of Man will also be ashamed when he comes in the glory." This is the reading from the Word.
Thanks be to God. Amen. So Peter, he got the title right, but he messed up the definition of what it meant to be the Christ or the Messiah. You see, he had a different understanding, as most of us know already, of who that Messiah was going to be and what it meant to be the Messiah. We know that the Jewish people at that time were under great, great oppression. They were oppressed first by the Roman government that were in charge of the area. But they were also oppressed by their religious leaders. That wonderful law that was given to the Jewish people had become rigid. And that in order to make things as simplified as they could, it was all complicated, actually. It was no longer remembering that the law was given to the people to make life better for the people and to improve their relationships with each other and with God. Instead, the law became important to follow every single bit of the law. It oppressed the people. The religious leaders of the time were in cahoots. They were cohorts. See, I even managed to put both of those words in with this service too. In the first service, I couldn't figure out which word I wanted to use, so I used both. They were in cahoots, cohorts with the religious authorities, with the Roman government, which meant that they were truly being oppressed in every way, these poor people. And so, the Jewish people, the common people, like all of us, they were waiting for a Messiah to come in and to rescue them, to change things, either to lead a great military and uprising of the people, and remembering that everywhere Jesus went, he had a gathering of people who would follow him. Or they were waiting for divine intervention like the walls of Jericho, where the people would come together and God would somehow overthrow the government, overthrow all of this oppression. So when Jesus started talking to Peter about dying, it didn't make sense to him. Dying on a cross? He had seen Jesus was not the only innocent Jewish person to die on a cross. There were others who had died on a cross by the Roman government, and nothing had happened. Nothing had changed. The people were still oppressed. So why would Jesus say that he was going to die on a cross, be another one of these martyrs, and nothing would happen? And so that's why Peter rebuked him, because Jesus was sounding like he was weak and like he was giving up and that he was going to fail in saving the people. Peter just didn't get it. Wherever Jesus went, yes, he had a group of people who followed him, but they followed partially because Jesus was being a bit subversive. He was healing people even on the Sabbath, having his followers eat on the Sabbath. He wasn't keeping all of those laws, the very letter of the law. He was following the intent of the law. There was already a political uprising happening. And when Jesus went to the cross, he was going to face opposition, the oppressors. He died on the cross because he was placed there by the people in power, the religious authorities, and the state. He allowed them to kill him. And if it had stopped right there, it would have been the same as any of the other innocent Jewish people who had been killed by the state. But it didn't stop there. Death, the tomb, did not have the last word. And Jesus rose again, saying that the oppressors would not win. He overcame the evil corporations of that time by his pacifist views. Sounds a bit like Gandhi, Mandela. It sounds a bit like we as the church have come to try to follow. So when Jesus said that we had to pick up our crosses and follow him, what it meant to pick up that cross was to be radical. It meant to do what he was doing, to speak up against the injustices, to speak up against the oppressors of that time and of our time. Very often when I'm talking to people, I've heard them say that they are carrying their cross. And many times, I don't think that they realize what they're saying. Just a couple of Sundays ago, we talked about filling a backpack full of rocks and the burdens that we carry around on our shoulders and how heavy the backpack full of rocks can get. Do you remember that? Do you remember what those burdens were, what those rocks were? Things like shame, grief, guilt. Many of the things that we named as burdens were things that had been imposed on us or things that were a result of maybe poor decisions that we'd made. Those things, those are burdens that we carry along on our shoulder that weigh us down. It is not the same thing to carry a cross as it is to carry a backpack full of rocks. Because to carry a cross means that we are denying ourselves, putting the needs of others first. A burden usually isn't like that. In fact, very often a burden can be serving ourselves, not others. So carrying a cross would be like Loretta coming here from Albuquerque, putting her son and her son's family first, denying herself and her church family and her family down in Albuquerque to spend all of this time helping her son and his family. That's not a burden, is it? That is carrying the cross. Carrying the cross is how many people have we had witness to us in this congregation? Caregivers for spouses who have been so sick and who've needed the support. And so the one spouse will deny themselves to carry the cross and to give strength and hope to their loved one. Carrying the cross is fighting for peace with justice in countries where there is no justice. It's fighting for justice between the Israelis and the Palestinians. Carrying the cross is being down at the Capitol every Wednesday for a prayer vigil, standing up for the civil rights of other people. Sometimes I hear, well, we shouldn't be doing these things because it's political. Jesus feeding people on the Sabbath? Jesus healing and casting out demons on the Sabbath? Those are political actions. For those of you who are going to be taking the class that Pete is offering on the last week, what you're going to hear is that on that entrance, triumphal entrance into Jerusalem, when Jesus went in and it was like a parade, that was a political statement, a political action. There was another entrance happening at the same time of political leaders. It was a statement. Jesus was political. Picking up and carrying our cross, following Jesus. Politics don't have to be in worship. But for our worship to be meaningful to God means that we are living out our faith every day outside of these walls. Every day, like that video, we are being the church, providing education, visiting the prisoners, doing all of the things that make us the church. And because of that, our worship on Sunday morning is meaningful to God. This week and this Lent, I invite you to take a look at what you're carrying on your back. Are you carrying a backpack full of rocks? Or are you carrying a cross? And I invite you, take off the backpack as much as you can. Make it as light as you can so that you can be strong enough to carry a cross this Lent. Do I hear an amen?